A crying woman begged the vampire king to turn her. A week later, what he said made even the guards cry. The woman's blood dripped onto the marble floor of the throne room, each crimson drop echoing like thunder as she pressed the silver dagger deeper into her own throat, her eyes locked on the ancient creature before her. "If you won't turn me," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her hollow cheeks, "then I'll die here on your floor, and my death will stain your conscience for eternity." Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The Vampire King, known throughout the realm as Theron the Eternal, hadn't moved from his obsidian throne in 3 centuries, yet now he rose with such speed that the candles throughout the vast chamber flickered and died. The woman, frail, dressed in widow's black, her wrists bearing the rope burns of recent captivity, didn't flinch as darkness consumed the room. "Remove the blade from your throat," Theron commanded, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "Now." "No." The woman's hand trembled, but her resolve held firm. "For 5 years I've had nothing. No voice, no choice, no mercy from anyone in this cursed kingdom. If you won't give me the power to reclaim what was stolen, then I choose to end it here, in the one place where my death might actually matter." The guards along the walls, 7 of Theron's most elite vampire warriors, shifted uncomfortably. In their combined 3,000 years of service, none had witnessed such audacity. Mortals who entered the Crimson Palace came with one of 3 purposes: to beg for mercy, to offer themselves as blood servants, or to attempt assassination. This woman was doing something entirely different. She was negotiating with her own mortality as currency. "You know nothing of what you ask," Theron said, descending the steps from his throne with predatory grace. His appearance was deceptive. He seemed no older than 30, with sharp features framed by black hair that fell past his shoulders. But his eyes held the frozen emptiness of endless time. The turning is not a gift. It's a curse that strips away everything that makes you human. Your warmth, your ability to walk in sunlight, your soul. "My soul," the woman laughed, a broken sound that filled the cavernous space with unexpected emotion. "My soul was taken from me the day they burned my daughter at the stake. My humanity died when I was sold into slavery for speaking against the church. My warmth vanished when I spent 3 winters in a cage, waiting to be someone's property. You speak of losing things as if I have anything left to lose." Theron stopped 5 paces from her, close enough now that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest. No breath, no heartbeat, just eternal stasis. "Your name." "Ilara." She swallowed, and fresh blood trickled down her neck. "Ilara Whitmore. Once a physician's wife, once a mother, now nothing. And what exactly do you believe immortality will grant you, Ilara Whitmore?" Theron's tone carried a dangerous edge. "Revenge? Justice? The ability to burn down the church that condemned your daughter?" "All of that," Ilara admitted without hesitation. "But first, I want the power to free the other women like me, the ones still in cages, the ones who've lost their children, their homes, their names. I want to become something that cannot be bought, sold, or silenced. I want to become fear itself." A profound silence followed her words. Even the eternal flames in the iron braziers seemed to burn quieter, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. Then, Theron did something that shocked his guards more than anything they'd witnessed in centuries. He smiled. "The remarkable grin," he said again, but this time his voice carried no command, only curiosity. "I will consider your request, but I need you alive to determine if you're worthy. How do I know you won't just kill me once I'm disarmed?" Ilara's grip on the silver dagger tightened. "Or throw me into the dungeons? You have my word." The word of a vampire? The word of a king. Theron extended his hand, palm up, in an ancient gesture of truce. "If I wanted you dead, Ilara Whitmore, you would be dead. I've killed for far less than threatening to bleed on my floor. The fact that you still breathe means I'm intrigued." Ilara studied his face, searching for deception in those ancient eyes. Finding none, or perhaps simply having nothing left to lose, she slowly withdrew the blade from her throat. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough that her hand came away slick with blood. Theron gestured to one of his guards, a female vampire with silver braids and armor forged from dragon bone. "Cassia, take her to the east wing, clean the wound, provide her with proper clothing and food. She's to be treated as a guest, not a prisoner." Cassia's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. "My lord, the east wing? That's reserved for honored visitors." "Yes." Theron's gaze never left Ilara. "This woman has done something remarkable tonight. She's reminded me what courage looks like." He turned back to his throne, ascending the steps with liquid grace. "Well, speak again in 3 days, Ilara Whitmore. Use that time to consider what you're truly asking for. Immortality is not power. It's an endless prison with yourself as the only cellmate." As Cassia approached and gently took Ilara's arm, the widow found her voice one last time. "And if, after 3 days, I still want this? If I'm still willing to pay any price?" Theron settled onto his throne, his expression unreadable. "Then we'll discuss terms." But understand this, I don't create new vampires lightly. The last person I turned was in 1653, and she begged me for true death within a decade. Immortality is the cruelest gift the gods ever devised. Crueler than watching your 7-year-old daughter burn? Ilara's voice cracked. Crueler than knowing the men who lit that fire sleep peacefully in their beds every night while I see her face in every flame? For a long moment, Theron simply stared at her, and something flickered in his ancient eyes, something that might have been recognition, or memory, or perhaps the ghost of an emotion he'd thought long dead. "No," he finally admitted, so quietly that even the vampires in the room barely heard him. "Perhaps not crueler than that." The east wing of the Crimson Palace was a revelation. Ilara had expected dungeons, torture chambers, the gothic horror that mortals whispered about in terrified voices. Instead, she found herself in apartments that rivaled any noble estate. Vaulted ceilings painted with celestial maps, windows of stained glass that filtered moonlight into prismatic colors, furniture carved from wood so ancient it seemed to pulse with its own life. Cassia had left her with fresh clothing, a basin of warm water infused with healing herbs, and instructions to ring a silver bell if she needed anything. Then the vampire warrior had departed, leaving Ilara alone for the first time since entering the palace. Alone. The word felt strange. For 5 years, she'd never been alone. Always watched, always guarded, always under someone's control. Even in the slave cages, she'd been pressed against other women, their collective despair thick enough to suffocate. Now, standing in this opulent room with her neck bandaged and her body draped in silk, Elara felt the full weight of what she'd done. She'd threatened the most powerful vampire in the known world. She'd held a blade to her own throat and demanded immortality like it was a commodity to be bartered. And somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. She moved to the window, looking out over the sprawling palace grounds. The Crimson Palace sat atop a mountain of black stone, surrounded by ancient forests that no mortal army dared traverse. From this height, she could see the distant lights of Thornwick, the city where she'd once lived her comfortable, ordinary life, the city where her daughter, Lily, had been born, the city where Lily had been taken. The memory came unbidden, as it always did. The knock on the door in the dead of night, the men in black robes, the accusation whispered by a jealous neighbor that Elara's herbs and remedies were witchcraft, the trial that lasted all of 15 minutes, Lily's small hand clutching hers as they were separated, the child screaming for her mother while the church officials dragged them in different directions. Elara had been sentenced to slavery for heresy. Lily, deemed corrupted by her mother's influence, had been sentenced to purification by fire. They'd made Elara watch. She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of grief that threatened to pull her under. 5 years. 5 years since she'd held her daughter. 5 years since she'd been anything other than property. And in all that time, one thought had sustained her: revenge. But it wasn't just revenge anymore. That's what she'd told Theron, and it was true. She'd seen too many women in those cages, mothers whose children had been stolen, wives whose husbands had sold them to pay debts, daughters who'd been trafficked like cattle. The world was full of predators who wore the mask of righteousness, who wielded laws and religion as weapons against the powerless. If Theron turned her, she could fight back. She could become the predator they feared. She could break their cages and burn their churches and make them feel a fraction of the terror they'd inflicted. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Elara called, expecting Cassia. Instead, a different vampire entered, a male with auburn hair and eyes the color of fresh blood. He carried a silver tray laden with food that made Elara's stomach clench with sudden hunger. It had been 2 days since she'd eaten anything more than moldy bread. "I'm Marcus," the vampire said, setting the tray on a carved wooden table. "I've served as the king's advisor for the past 2 centuries. He's asked me to answer any questions you might have about the process." Elara approached the table warily. The process of becoming a vampire? Among other things. Marcus gestured to a chair, waiting for her to sit before he continued. "I should tell you, what you did tonight was extraordinarily dangerous. The king has executed mortals for far less insolence." "I'm aware." Elara picked up a piece of bread, forcing herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. "I didn't have much left to lose." "Didn't you?" Marcus tilted his head, studying her with unnerving intensity. "You had your life. That's not nothing." "My life ended 5 years ago." Elara met his gaze without flinching. "What I have now is just survival. I want to actually live again, to have power, to make choices that matter." Marcus was silent for a moment, then poured her a glass of wine from a crystal decanter. "I'm going to tell you something that the king might not appreciate me sharing. 23 mortals have come to this palace in the last century, begging to be turned. All of them had tragic stories. All of them believed immortality would solve their problems. And Theron turned none of them. He sent them away with gold, with letters of introduction to distant kingdoms, with opportunities to rebuild their lives. Some took the gifts gratefully, others left cursing his name, calling him heartless. Marcus leaned forward. Do you know why he refused them all? Elara shook her head. Because they wanted to escape their pain. They saw vampirism as an end to suffering. Marcus's expression was grave, but it's not. If anything, it amplifies suffering. Every emotion you feel as a human becomes sharper, more intense, more difficult to control when you're turned. Your grief? It will be with you for centuries, decades, forever, undiluted by time or healing. Your rage? It will burn so hot you'll struggle not to destroy everything you touch. Good, Elara said quietly. I don't want to escape my pain. I want to weaponize it. Marcus actually laughed, a sound of genuine surprise. Now that, he said, is a reason the king might actually respect. They talked for another hour, Marcus explaining the mechanics of turning, the laws that governed vampire society, the price of immortality. Elara listened carefully, asking pointed questions that clearly impressed him. She wasn't a naive supplicant begging for a fairy tale. She was a woman conducting research, understanding exactly what contract she was negotiating. Finally, as midnight approached, Marcus stood to leave. The king will summon you in 3 days. Use that time wisely. Read the books in this room. They contain histories of our kind. Walk the palace grounds if you wish. Think carefully about whether this is truly what you want. I already know what I want, Elara said firmly. Perhaps, Marcus paused at the door, but knowing what you want and understanding what you'll become are two different things. The woman who walks out of the turning chamber will not be Elara Whitmore. She'll be something new, something other. Make sure you're ready to let the human you die. After he left, Elara did exactly as he'd suggested. She pulled books from the shelves, ancient tomes bound in leather and metal, their pages filled with the history of vampires. She read about their origins, about the first vampires who'd been created by a goddess's curse for defying death. She read about their laws, their hierarchies, their wars with the church and with themselves. And she read about Theron. The Vampire King's history was written in blood and ash. Had been turned in ancient Rome, a general who'd refused to die after being betrayed by his own emperor. For 2,000 years, had built and destroyed kingdoms, loved and lost countless companions, witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. The books called him brilliant and ruthless, merciful and terrible, a king who ruled not through fear, but through something far more powerful, respect. One passage made Elara pause. King Theron's greatest sorrow is not the weight of immortality, but the burden of creating others who must carry it. He has turned only 17 mortals in 2 millennia, and each weighs on his conscience like a stone. For he knows that in granting them eternal life, he has also sentenced them to eternal consequences. Elara closed the book slowly, processing this new information. Theron wasn't refusing to turn people because he was cruel. He was refusing because he was merciful, because he understood that immortality wasn't the escape people imagined. But she wasn't looking for escape, she was looking for transformation. The next 3 days passed in a strange dream. Elara explored the palace, discovering libraries and training yards, gardens that bloomed with night-flowering plants, halls filled with art collected across millennia. She met other members of Theron's court, vampires who regarded her with curiosity and wariness, uncertain how to treat a mortal who'd threatened their king and lived. Cassia became an unexpected companion, explaining the palace's rhythms and answering Elara's questions about vampire combat techniques. If he turns you, the warrior said while demonstrating defensive stances in a moonlit courtyard, you'll need to learn how to fight. Immortality doesn't mean invulnerability. We can be killed, and there are many who would love to destroy the king's newest progeny. "Why do you serve him?" Ilara asked, mimicking Cassia's stance. "You're powerful enough to rule your own territory."
"Why stay here?" Cassia's expression softened. "Because 500 years ago, I was where you are now. A woman who'd lost everything. A slave in all but name. Theron didn't just turn me. He gave me purpose. He taught me that power without principle is just tyranny. That immortality without growth is just stagnation." She smiled slightly. "He's not just a king. He's a teacher. And he only accepts students who can teach him something in return. What could I possibly teach a 2,000-year-old vampire? Perhaps nothing. Or perhaps something he's forgotten in all those centuries." Cassia executed a complex movement that Ilara couldn't follow. Like what it means to have something worth dying for. On the third night, as promised, Theron summoned her. Ilara was escorted not to the throne room, but to a private study where the Vampire King sat beside a roaring fireplace, reading a leather-bound journal. He looked up as she entered, gesturing to a chair across from him. "You've been busy," he observed. "My librarians tell me you've read more in 3 days than most mortals do in a year. I wanted to understand what I'm asking for." Ilara sat, her spine straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite her racing heart. No more misconceptions. No more romantic fantasies about immortality. "I know exactly what you're offering, and I still want it." Theron closed his journal, studying her with those ancient eyes. "Tell me about your daughter." The question caught Ilara off guard. Why? "Because in 2,000 years, I've learned that we carry our dead with us, mortal or immortal. If I turn you, Lily will walk beside you for eternity. I need to know if that will destroy you or forge you into something stronger." Ilara took a shaky breath, the grief always so close to the surface. Lily was 7 when they killed her. She loved flowers and books and asking impossible questions about how the world worked. She wanted to be a physician like her father, to heal people. A tear tracked down Ilara's cheek, but her voice remained steady. "They burned her because I taught her to read. Because I gave her books about herbs and healing. The church called it witchcraft. I called it education." "And if I turn you," Theron said softly, "what will you do with immortality? Will you spend it hunting every person who wronged you? Because I can tell you from experience, revenge is a shallow foundation for eternal life." "No," Ilara said, surprising him. "I'll hunt the ones directly responsible. The judge who sentenced her, the priest who lit the fire, the neighbor who lied. But after that?" She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with purpose. "I'll build something. A sanctuary for women like me. A place where they can learn to fight back, to protect themselves, to never be powerless again. I'll teach them what you taught Cassia, that power and principle aren't opposites, that immortality can mean something more than just endless survival." For the first time since she'd met him, Theron's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. "You understand that if I turn you, you'll be bound to me, not as a slave, but as progeny. My blood will flow in your veins. My enemies will become your enemies. You'll be part of this court, subject to its laws and its politics. I understand. And you understand that you can never go back? That the Ilara Whitmore who was a wife and mother will die in the turning? The woman who emerges will be something other? I'm not going back. There's nothing to go back to." Ilara's voice was iron. "I died 5 years ago, watching my daughter burn. What you're offering isn't resurrection, it's rebirth, and I'm ready." Theron stood, moving to the fireplace. For a long moment, he simply stared into the flames, and Elara wondered if he was seeing his own past in the dancing light. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I'm going to tell you a story about the last person I turned." He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the fire. Her name was Isabella. She came to me in 1653, during the height of the witch trials. Her entire family had been executed, husband, children, parents. She'd escaped, barely, and made her way to my palace. She begged me to turn her, exactly as you did. Said she wanted power, wanted revenge, wanted to make them all pay. "What happened?" Elara asked quietly. "I turned her." Theron's jaw tightened. "And for 10 years she was magnificent, powerful, intelligent, purposeful. She hunted the men who'd killed her family. She built networks to protect other accused witches. She seemed to thrive." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was filled with ancient pain. "Then, on the 10th anniversary of her turning, she walked into the sunrise. Left me a letter saying that the woman she'd become could never truly live, because the woman she'd been, the mother, the wife, was still dead." Silence fell between them, heavy with implication. "I can't promise you won't suffer the same fate," Theron said, finally turning to face her. "I can't guarantee that immortality will give you what you're searching for. What I can promise is this: if I turn you, I'll teach you everything I know. I'll give you the tools to become the weapon you want to be. And if, at any point, you decide the burden is too much, I'll grant you a true death with honor." Elara stood, crossing to stand before him. "And if I never ask for death? If I become what I say I will, if I build that sanctuary, if I use my immortality for something more than revenge?" A ghost of a smile crossed Theron's lips. "Then, perhaps you'll teach me something I've forgotten, that immortality can be a gift instead of a curse." He extended his hand, and Elara took it without hesitation. His skin was cold as marble, harder than any mortal flesh, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. "7 days," Theron said.
"I need 7 days to prepare the ritual, to ensure everything is perfect. The turning is dangerous. You could die, truly die, if anything goes wrong. Use this week to say goodbye to your mortal life. Write letters if you need to. Visit places one last time. Make peace with the death of who you were." "I made peace with that death 5 years ago," Elara replied. "I have no letters to write, no places to visit, no life to mourn. I'm ready now." Theron studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Then we'll use the week differently. I'm going to train you. If you're going to survive immortality, you need to understand control. The hunger for blood will consume you if you're not prepared. The strength will destroy everything you touch if you don't learn restraint. I'll teach you meditation, discipline, mental fortitude. When you emerge from the turning, you'll be as prepared as any vampire I've ever created." "Thank you," Elara said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Don't thank me yet." Theron's expression was grave. "Thank me in a century, if you're still here and still grateful. Immortality is a long game, Elara Whitmore, and we're about to find out if you're strong enough to play it." The week that followed was the most intense of Elara's life, mortal or otherwise. Theron kept his word, training her with a rigor that would have broken most people. They began before sunset each day, working in a private chamber deep within the palace, where no one would disturb them. He taught her to sit perfectly still for hours, controlling her breathing, quieting her mind. The hunger, he explained, is not just physical. It's mental, psychological. It will whisper to you constantly,
telling you to feed, to hunt, to kill. If you can't silence your own thoughts, you'll never silence the hunger. He taught her to move with purpose, to understand that every action would carry supernatural strength. You'll be able to snap necks without meaning to. Crush bones with a careless touch. The world will become fragile around you, and you must learn to exist in it without breaking everything you hold. He taught her about vampire politics, about the various courts and clans, about the ancient laws that kept their kind from descending into chaos. You won't just be my progeny, he said. You'll be royalty by association. Other vampires will test you, challenge you, try to use you against me. You need to know your enemies before they reveal themselves. But most importantly, he taught her about herself. In their meditation sessions, he forced her to confront every memory, every pain, every rage that drove her. You can't run from your past, he said. It will chase you through eternity. Better to face it now, to integrate it, to transform it from a wound into armor. It was during one of these sessions, 5 days into her training, that Ilara broke. They were sitting across from each other in the meditation chamber, breathing in sync, when Theron said quietly, "Tell me about the moment they took Lily from your arms." The question shattered Ilara's carefully maintained control. The grief she'd been holding at bay, using rage as a dam, finally overwhelmed her defenses. She collapsed forward, sobbing with such violence that her entire body shook. And Theron, the ancient vampire king who hadn't shown emotion in centuries, did something remarkable. He moved to kneel beside her, placing one cold hand on her shoulder. "Let it out," he said softly, "all of it. The turning will amplify whatever you carry into it. Better to purge what you can now." So Ilara cried. She cried for Lily, for the 7 years they had, and the 70 they'd never get. She cried for her husband, who died trying to defend them. She cried for the 5 years she'd spent in cages, for the women she'd watched die beside her, for the pieces of herself she'd sacrificed just to survive. When the storm finally passed, she found herself leaning against Theron's chest, his arm around her shoulders in an embrace that should have felt awkward, but somehow didn't. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He simply held her, this ancient creature who'd seen countless humans suffer and die, and let her grief run its course. "Why are you doing this?" Ilara finally asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you being kind? Everyone says you're ruthless." "I am ruthless," Theron replied. "I've killed more people than you could count. I've destroyed kingdoms and ended bloodlines. But ruthlessness and cruelty are not the same thing." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "You remind me of someone I knew long ago. Someone who believed that pain could be transmuted into purpose. She was wrong, but she was magnificent in her conviction." "Isabella?" "No, someone much older." Theron stood, offering his hand to help her up. "My sister. The reason I became a vampire in the first place." Ilara took his hand, rising. "I thought you were turned by a goddess's curse." "That's what the books say, and it's true, for the first vampires. But I wasn't first. I was turned by choice, by one of the originals, because I wanted the power to protect my sister from the emperor who desired her." Theron's expression was distant, lost in memory. "I succeeded, became powerful enough that even emperors feared me. But by the time I'd secured her safety, she'd died of old age. I'd spent decades building power while she lived and died in the time it took me to blink." "I'm sorry," Ilara said quietly. "Don't be. It taught me the most important lesson of immortality. Power without speed is meaningless. You can't protect the ones you love if you wait too long to act." He met her eyes. "That's why I'm turning you, Ilara. Not because you begged, not because you threatened, but because you've already lost what you wanted to protect." You're not seeking power to save someone. You're seeking it to ensure no one else suffers as you did. That's a purpose that can sustain centuries. The revelation hung between them, shifting something fundamental in their dynamic. This wasn't a king granting a boon to a desperate subject. This was one survivor recognizing another across the vast gulf of mortality and time. On the seventh day, as the sun set and the palace came alive with twilight, Theron came to Elaris' chambers dressed in formal robes of deep crimson and black. "It's time," he said simply. "Are you ready?" Elara wore a simple white dress that Cassia had provided, traditional garb for the turning ceremony. "I'm ready," she affirmed. They walked through the palace in silence, descending deeper than Elara had ever gone before. The turning chamber was ancient, carved from bedrock, its walls covered in symbols that predated written language. In the center stood a stone altar, and around it stood the 7 members of Theron's inner court: Cassia, Marcus, and 5 others she'd come to know over the past week. "The ceremony is simple," Theron explained as they approached the altar. "You'll lie here. I'll feed you my blood, then drain you to the point of death. You'll exist in that liminal space, not alive, not dead, and then my blood will transform you, rewriting everything you are at the cellular level. It will be the worst pain you've ever experienced, and it will last hours." "How many hours?" "It varies. For some, 3 or 4. For others, as many as 12. Theron's expression was grave. "There's no way to speed the process or dull the pain. You'll have to endure it consciously, fully aware, while your body dies and resurrects itself." Elara climbed onto the altar, lying back against the cold stone. Above her, the ceiling was painted with a mural of a goddess crowned in stars, the one who'd cursed the first vampires, according to legend. "Will you stay with me during the turning?" "Every moment," Theron promised.
"I've never left a progeny to turn alone, and I won't start now." He leaned over her, his face inches from hers. "Last chance to change your mind, Elara Whitmore. Once we begin, there's no going back. You'll never see another sunrise, never taste human food, never bear children or grow old or die naturally. You'll be mine, bound by blood and law for as long as you exist." Elara reached up, placing her hand against his cold cheek. "I told you already. I died 5 years ago. This isn't death. This is resurrection. Now stop stalling and turn me." A brief smile crossed Theron's lips. Then he bit his own wrist, tearing open the vein with his fangs, and pressed it to her mouth. "Drink," he commanded, "as much as you can." The blood was nothing like Elara expected. It didn't taste of copper or salt or anything human. It tasted of starlight and midnight and ancient magic. Impossibly old, impossibly powerful. It burned down her throat like liquid fire, and she felt it spreading through her body, touching every cell, preparing her for transformation. When she'd drunk enough, Theron pulled his wrist away, licking the wound closed with supernatural speed. Then, before Elara could prepare herself, he struck, his fangs sinking into her throat with predatory precision. The sensation was indescribable. Not painful, exactly, but overwhelming. She could feel him drinking her life, could sense her heartbeat slowing as her blood left her body. The world began to fade, colors dulling, sounds becoming muffled and distant. She was dying, truly dying, and some primal part of her brain screamed in terror. But Elara didn't scream. She focused on the mural above her, on the goddess crowned in stars, and thought about Lily, about the women still in cages, about the purpose that would carry her through centuries. Then the pain began.
Theron's blood, now mingling with what little remained of her own, began rewriting her DNA. Her bones felt like they were breaking and reforming. Her muscles tore and healed in rapid cycles. Her nervous system caught fire, every nerve ending screaming in agony. And through it all, Theron held her hand, his cold grip the only anchor in a sea of torment. Hours passed. Ilara lost all sense of time, existing only in waves of pain that crested and broke endlessly. She heard herself screaming but couldn't stop, felt her body convulsing but couldn't control it. Every cell was dying and being reborn, and she was consciously aware of each individual death. At some point, 3 hours in, or maybe 6, or maybe 12, something fundamental shifted. The pain didn't stop, but it transformed. Instead of being something inflicted upon her, it became something she moved through, like swimming through fire. She began to observe it rather than just suffer it, to understand that this agony was the price of transformation. And then, so suddenly it shocked her, the pain stopped. Ilara opened her eyes, and the world exploded into clarity. She could see every crack in the ceiling, every brushstroke in the mural, could hear the heartbeats of the 7 vampires surrounding her, even though technically they had no heartbeat, could smell the stone and ancient magic, and something else, something warm and alive. "Blood," Theron said quietly, still holding her hand. "You're smelling the blood of a living human. One of my servants is upstairs, several floors away, and you can scent them. That's how sensitive you are now." Ilara sat up slowly, and the movement felt different, lighter, more controlled. She looked down at her hands and saw that her skin had become pale, almost luminous in the chamber's dim light. When she touched her neck, she felt no pulse, no warmth, no heartbeat. She was dead, and she'd never felt more alive.
"How do you feel?" Marcus asked, stepping closer with obvious caution. Ilara considered the question carefully. "Powerful," she said finally, "and hungry, so incredibly hungry." "That's normal," Theron assured her, helping her down from the altar. "The hunger will be overwhelming at first. That's why we have prepared a donor, a willing volunteer from my household who knows what you are and what you need." He led her from the turning chamber, and Ilara noticed that she moved differently now. Each step was perfectly balanced, preternaturally graceful. She could sense the other vampires around her, could feel the ancient power that flowed through Theron like a river of cold starlight. They emerged into a smaller chamber where a young man waited, seated in a comfortable chair. He looked nervous but resolute. When he saw Ilara, he bowed his head respectfully. "My lady," he said, "I'm honored to be your first." The smell of his blood nearly drove Ilara mad. She could hear his heart pumping, could see the veins beneath his skin, could imagine how warm and satisfying. Control. Theron's hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm. "You're stronger than the hunger. You proved that during your turning. Don't lose yourself now." Ilara closed her eyes, reaching for the meditation techniques he taught her. Breathe. Center. Control. The hunger was there, screaming at her to feed, to tear, to consume. But beneath it, she found her purpose, the reason she'd chosen this path. When she opened her eyes again, she was calmer, still hungry, but in control. She approached the young man slowly, carefully, and when she finally bit down, her fangs emerging instinctively, she drank with care and precision. Not too much, not enough to weaken him dangerously, just enough to satisfy the immediate craving. When she pulled away, licking the wound closed as Theron had taught her, the young man smiled. "Well done, my lady. You have excellent control for a newborn." She does, Theron agreed, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. I told you she was remarkable. The next hour was spent adjusting to her new existence. Theron and the others taught her how to move through the palace without accidentally destroying everything, how to regulate her strength, how to avoid mirrors, which would reflect nothing, and sunlight, which would kill her. They explained the political landscape she'd just entered, the enemies she'd inherited, the responsibilities she'd accepted. Finally, as dawn approached and the vampires began preparing for day sleep, Theron took Ilara aside. "There's one final thing," he said, leading her to a private armory. "If you're going to hunt the men who killed Lily, you'll need proper weapons." He presented her with a sword forged from vampire steel, a metal that looked like moonlight solidified, sharp enough to cut through bone like butter. "This belonged to Isabella," he said quietly. "She used it for vengeance, and then she left it behind when she chose death. I think she'd want you to have it, to succeed where she failed." Ilara took the sword, feeling its perfect balance. "I won't fail. I won't let the grief consume me like it did her." "See that you don't." Theron's expression was serious. "Because I've come to care about you, Ilara. In the short time since you threatened to bleed on my floor, you've reminded me why I became a king in the first place. Not for power, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Don't make me watch another person I care about walk into the sunrise." Ilara stepped forward, standing on her toes to kiss his cold cheek. "I promise. I'll live, truly live, for centuries. I'll build the sanctuary I described. I'll become the weapon I claimed I'd be. And someday, when I've done all that, I'll teach you how to be happy again." Theron actually laughed, a sound she suspected few people had ever heard. "Ambitious. I like that." He sobered slightly. "Rest now." Tomorrow night, we begin your real training. And tomorrow night, I'll also give you the names and locations of the men who killed your daughter. What you do with that information is your choice. As Ilara made her way to her chambers, now a permanent residence in the palace's east wing, she felt a sense of completion settling over her. She was no longer Ilara Whitmore, the powerless widow. She was something new, something dangerous. She was a vampire, a warrior, a promise of vengeance and justice wrapped in immortal flesh. And she was just getting started. 7 nights after her turning, Ilara stood in the shadows outside a wealthy manor in Thornwick, watching the man inside through his study window. Judge Aldrich Blackthorne, the man who'd sentenced her and Lily. He sat at his desk signing papers, completely unaware that death watched from the darkness. It would be easy to kill him, so easy. She could move faster than he could perceive, break his neck before he even registered her presence. The vampire inside her, the predator, hungered for exactly that kind of violence. But Ilara didn't move, not yet, because Theron had taught her something important. Revenge without purpose was just murder, and she'd promised herself something more meaningful than simple murder. She waited until Blackthorne finished his work and climbed the stairs to his bedchamber, waited until he dismissed his servants and lay down to sleep, believing himself safe in his fortress of privilege and power. Then she moved. Blackthorne woke to find her sitting in the chair beside his bed, Isabella's sword laid across her lap, her red eyes glowing in the darkness. He tried to scream, but she was faster. Her hand over his mouth, her supernatural strength pinning him effortlessly. "Judge Aldrich Blackthorne," she said calmly, "do you remember a woman named Ilara Whitmore? A little girl named Lily?" Recognition and terror warred in his eyes. He tried to shake his head, to deny it, but she could smell the lie on him. You sentenced my daughter to burn. She was 7 years old. Her crime was being able to read. Ilara's voice was deadly quiet. I'm not going to kill you, Judge. That would be too merciful. Instead, I'm going to do something worse. She removed her hand from his mouth, daring him to scream. He was too terrified. I'm going to ruin you, she continued. Over the next decade, I'm going to systematically destroy everything you value. Your wealth, your reputation, your family's name. I'm going to expose every corrupt judgment you've made, every bribe you've taken, every life you've destroyed for profit. And when you're broken, when you're begging for death, only then will I grant it. So you understand the fear my daughter felt. So you experience what it means to have everything taken from you piece by piece. Blackthorn found his voice. You're dead. I saw you sold as a slave. I came back, Ilara smiled, allowing her fangs to show. And I brought friends. She stood, moving to his window and opening it to the night air. Sleep well, Judge. Tomorrow, your world begins to crumble, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Then she was gone, moving through the night like a shadow, leaving Blackthorn to his terror and his sleepless hours. This was only the first step. There were others on her list. The priest who'd lit the fire, the neighbor who'd lied, the magistrate who'd sold her into slavery. Each would face justice, not through quick death, but through systematic destruction. But as she ran back toward the Crimson Palace, leaping between rooftops with supernatural grace, Ilara felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but purpose. This wasn't just revenge, it was setting things right. And when she'd finished with these men, she'd move on to the larger work. The sanctuary, the women still in cages, the system that allowed such brutality. She had centuries to work with now. Centuries to build something that would outlast her pain. By the time she returned to the palace, dawn was approaching. She found Theron in his study, as she'd somehow known she would. He looked up as she entered, reading her expression with his ancient eyes. "You didn't kill him," he observed. "No." Ilara sat across from him, mirroring that first conversation they'd had. Death would be mercy. I promised him something worse. Theron studied her for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. "You're learning. Revenge is a tool, not a purpose. Use it to clear the ground, then build something lasting." "That's the plan." Ilara met his gaze steadily. "Thank you. For turning me, for training me, for giving me this chance." "Thank me in a century," Theron replied with a slight smile, "if you still think immortality was worth the price." "I will," Ilara promised. "I will." As the sun rose and they both retreated to their chambers for day sleep, Ilara felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of a victim, but the powerful, certain hope of someone who'd seized control of their own destiny. She was no longer powerless, no longer voiceless, no longer anyone's property or victim. She was Ilara, progeny of Theron the Eternal, vampire of the Crimson Court, and she had centuries to make the world a better place. One rescued woman, one destroyed tyrant, one act of justice at a time. The woman who'd cried on Theron's throne room floor was dead. In her place stood something far more dangerous. A woman who'd transformed her grief into purpose, her pain into power, and her loss into a mission that would echo through eternity. And somewhere in the place beyond life,
Ilara liked to imagine that Lily was watching, proud of the warrior her mother had become. 7 nights after her turning, Ilara stood in the shadows outside a wealthy manor in Thornwick, watching the man inside through his study window. Judge Aldrich Blackthorne, the man who'd sentenced her and Lily. He sat at his desk, signing papers, completely unaware that death watched from the darkness. It would be easy to kill him. So easy. She could move faster than he could perceive, break his neck before he even registered her presence. The vampire inside her, the predator, hungered for exactly that kind of violence. But Ilara didn't move. Not yet. Because Theron had taught her something important. Revenge without purpose was just murder. And she'd promised herself something more meaningful than simple murder. She waited until Blackthorne finished his work and climbed the stairs to his bedchamber. Waited until he dismissed his servants and lay down to sleep, believing himself safe in his fortress of privilege and power. Then she moved. Blackthorne woke to find her sitting in the chair beside his bed. Isabella's sword laid across her lap, her red eyes glowing in the darkness. He tried to scream, but she was faster. Her hand over his mouth, her supernatural strength pinning him effortlessly. "Judge Aldrich Blackthorne," she said calmly, "do you remember a woman named Ilara Whitmore? A little girl named Lily?" Recognition and terror warred in his eyes. He tried to shake his head, to deny it, but she could smell the lie on him. "You sentenced my daughter to burn. She was 7 years old. Her crime was being able to read." Ilara's voice was deadly quiet. "I'm not going to kill you, Judge. That would be too merciful. Instead, I'm going to do something worse." She removed her hand from his mouth, daring him to scream. He was too terrified. "I'm going to ruin you," she continued. "Over the next decade, I'm going to systematically destroy everything you value. Your wealth, your reputation, your family's name. I'm going to expose every corrupt judgment you've made, every bribe you've taken, every life you've destroyed for profit. And when you're broken, when you're begging for death, only then will I grant it." So you understand the fear my daughter felt. So you experience what it means to have everything taken from you piece by piece. Blackthorne found his voice. You're dead. I saw you sold as a slave." "I came back," Ilara smiled, allowing her fangs to show. "And I brought friends." She stood, moving to his window and opening it to the night air. "Sleep well, Judge. Tomorrow, your world begins to crumble, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Then she was gone, moving through the night like a shadow, leaving Blackthorne to his terror and his sleepless hours. This was only the first step. There were others on her list. The priest who'd lit the fire, the neighbor who'd lied, the magistrate who'd sold her into slavery. Each would face justice, not through quick death, but through systematic destruction. But as she ran back toward the Crimson Palace, leaping between rooftops with supernatural grace, Ilara felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, but purpose. This wasn't just revenge. It was setting things right. And when she'd finished with these men, she'd move on to the larger work. The sanctuary. The women still in cages. The system that allowed such brutality. She had centuries to work with now. Centuries to build something that would outlast her pain. By the time she returned to the palace, dawn was approaching. She found Theron in his study, as she'd somehow known she would. He looked up as she entered, reading her expression with his ancient eyes. "You didn't kill him," he observed. "No. Ilara sat across from him, mirroring that first conversation they'd had. Death would be mercy. I promised him something worse. Theron studied her for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. You're learning. Revenge is a tool, not a purpose. Use it to clear the ground, then build something lasting. That's the plan. Ilara met his gaze steadily. Thank you. For turning me. For training me. For giving me this chance. Thank me in a century, Theron replied with a slight smile. If you still think immortality was worth the price. I will, Ilara promised. I will. As the sun rose and they both retreated to their chambers for day sleep, Ilara felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of a victim, but the powerful, certain hope of someone who'd seized control of their own destiny. She was no longer powerless, no longer voiceless, no longer anyone's property or victim. She was Ilara, progeny of Theron the Eternal, vampire of the Crimson Court. And she had centuries to make the world a better place. One rescued woman, one destroyed tyrant, one act of justice at a time. The woman who'd cried on Theron's throne room floor was dead. In her place stood something far more dangerous. A woman who'd transformed her grief into purpose, her pain into power, and her loss into a mission that would echo through eternity. And somewhere in the place beyond life, Ilara liked to imagine that Lily was watching, proud of the warrior her mother had become.